Welcome to the Secure CIO, the podcast for technology executives who are tasked with hiring and retaining great cybersecurity leaders. Join best-selling author Claire Pales together with industry thought leaders as they answer your questions about sourcing the right leaders, building cybersecurity teams, candidate selection, salaries, skills, and more.
Hello, I'm Claire Pales and welcome to the Secure CIO podcast. A quick note before we start that today's podcast is not a sponsored episode. I'm happy to welcome Louise Smith as our guest. Louise is the Director for Workforce Development and Education at the Australian Computer Society. She's a business capability specialist with over 15 years' experience consulting to individual businesses and governments on the skill needs within their organisations, undertaking training needs analysis and workforce strategy development to address current and future skill requirements. This includes whole-of-sector approaches through her senior management roles for both HR, vocational education and training sectors, and member-based professional associations. Louise's professional career spans across Australia and international markets, including Indonesia, Hong Kong, Vietnam, Papua New Guinea and Sri Lanka. Louise is an SFIA or Sofia accredited consultant, Sofia Council member, ICT Industry Reference Committee member. She's degree qualified along with a diploma in training and assessment and a diploma in quality auditing. Louise, thank you so much for joining us today.
Not a problem. Thank you for having me, Claire.
So Louise, I've invited you here today because I wanted to have a chat to you about the SFIA Framework and the use of that within organisations. And I guess just a reminder, it's the skill framework for the information age. How did this framework come about?
So SFIA originally came out of the UK, and so it's dating back to around the late 80s. However, SFIA in its current form was first released back in 2000 by the SFIA Foundation, which comprised of a consortium of organisations, which includes the British Computer Society, who are very mindful of the way in which our workforce and our IT and digital-based workforces need to collaborate based on skills and competencies and capabilities. So there was a need to ensure consistency, a common language in articulating the way in which skills are applied and operated back out into workforces. So hence the original evolution of SFIA. It's over 20 years old now, but the great thing about SFIA is that it is current. It maintains that currency around the industry needs, but also too that it is collectively engaging with a broad range of stakeholders, both in Australia and internationally. So it is very much an international capability framework to really drive and enable those common conversations around skills, capability, and how best we can inform the future workforce.
So if you think about the value of the framework, I want to ask you a couple of questions about it. Firstly of all, why would a CIO want to use this tool? And I guess for listeners of this podcast, if you can put maybe a security overlay in some way, shape or form, that would be helpful too.
So in terms of why our C-suite, and not just restricted to CIOs, obviously the expansion around our C-suite positions in technology or with a technology touch point, really the driver around their engagement with SFIA or any capability framework is really to firstly identify skills of opportunity, skills of mobility, but also to really drive the conversation around how am I preparing my workforce for today and how am I going to transition them into the future. So we're all aware that digital disruption is really a core, it's constant actually to our sector, and it is expanding out to other sectors within our economy. But one of the key drivers that our CIOs are really why they're utilising SFIA is because they don't necessarily have that clarity around what their skills are today. So what their benchmarks are, what is their profile and baseline to enable them to be better prepared, not just for the technology that they may be bringing into a company, the oversight that they may have around security needs and privacy needs across an organization, but also how they're preparing their workforce. So if I take the context of security, we all are fully aware that cybersecurity, cyber resilience is at the forefront of a lot of our major corporations and organizations in today's workplace. The reason for that is because obviously heightened awareness and touch point with digital technology, therefore increases the chances of security breaches, impacts on privacy. So there is a need not just within the IT workforce itself, but in terms of the broader workforce who now have a heightened engagement with digital technology to better understand what the impacts are from a security context. So as an example, we have a number of organizations that we engage with that are really looking to, one, identify what their data literacy and digital capabilities are across the broader workforce, not just isolated to the one workforce. And Sofia, from an CIO's context, has enabled a common language to be applied. So it's not in digital or IT speak, that it would resonate with other C-suite positions across the broader organization, people leaders, all the way down to individual workers and employees. They can understand what this framework is saying and how those skills are identifying the core needs for the business. So with that, they have been leveraging off the language that's being used within Sofia to then enable and to push that through to its policies and its processes around how in which they support their cybersecurity resilience.
So is it a point-in-time assessment that's done? And if so, how do CIOs get the most value out of that sort of one-time activity?
Well, Sofia First is a capability framework. So it's essentially providing the benchmark. So it's providing descriptions around skills and how those skills are applied based on levels of responsibility in terms of Sofia speak. With regards to the assessment methodology and the process that's taken, each organisation is very different, and even country to country in terms of the way in which Sofia as a capability framework is implemented does vary. So essentially, a self-assessment is a point-in-time assessment because it's at that point in which the individual has completed and undertaken that form of assessment, be it self-assessment or through a validation process. How our CIOs are getting the most value out of this assessment process or implementing Sofia has really been around an understanding of that skills capture exercise. So what skills have been captured through a process of assessment? How does that compare to benchmark roles that may have also been profiled during that process? And where are our gaps? So CIOs and our people leaders are really crying out for identification and awareness of on pinpointing where their specific gaps are and needs are within their workforce, and how to ensure that they are able to support any uplift that's needed across the team. So we find that a lot of our organisations that implement Sofia do it at a point in time, but then there's a component where they need to look back and reflect. So therefore, there is a refreshment phase. So they may re-engage with Sofia as a capability framework, be it on a bi-yearly or a yearly basis. We have other organisations that are, and CIOs that are using it to identify the availability of skills and capabilities across their workforce and tying that directly to projects and also BAU activities. So I suppose in essence, yes, it is a point in time, but the information, it continues to be of value for a longer period of time as well. Also, our CIOs, the way in which they consider future state, which is probably a conversation in its own right, how to identify the way of the future, our transition into future state, it really is something that is blue sky at this point in time. So therefore, we're only moving ahead 2 to 3 years. Our viewpoint and lens is not extending out to a 5-10 year view when you relate it directly back to skills and capabilities. So therefore, our CIOs are primarily using Sofia or any capability framework in the digital space as a point-in-time assessment, but it informs an ongoing conversation.
You mentioned that obviously there are more than just Sofia. There are other frameworks out in the industry. What's the point of difference, would you say, between Sofia and some of the other frameworks that are available?
So from an IT or ICT context, I would say Sofia is a common language. So the first key a benefit that we see coming out of the use of Sofia in the work that we do here in Australia through the ACS is it is a conduit between what traditionally is your HR business partners and your L&D capability teams back into the IT department. So there has been historically a disconnect. So as an example, we all have exposure to our job or position descriptions. Unfortunately, the way in which those have been described and relayed back out into the business aren't necessarily, or to date haven't been articulating effectively what that role entails, what are the expectations, and also what are the needs to support those roles in particular. With Sofia being a common language, it's technology agnostic. So it's not drilling down into our traditional methodology, tools, applications, and platform speak. It's talking to the heart of the skill as it is. So regardless of if you're a developer that's working on a broad range of technology stacks, you sometimes can be very focused on a particular methodology, language that we use, coding, etc. But with Sofia, it's talking to the heart of the skill. So a programmer has defined skills that are specific and consistent throughout Sofia, and it's not drawing in those technology stacks, which may impact the way in which an individual would see the application of that skill. So one, being a common language is really critical in terms of, and also that it is technology agnostic. So we do see other capability frameworks, competency-based frameworks out there in our sector, for example, ITIL. Those capability frameworks have also been encapsulated within Sofia because it is technology agnostic, because it does use a common language. So it enables our organisations to really draw off a broad range of applications and methodologies. So regardless of whether or not they're highly focused in one particular platform, if they're focused in cloud, if they're focused in cyber, the skills are still consistent as per the language used within Sofia. So that's been a great attribute to Sofia. It's also been a challenge to our CIOs to understand how they can draw in other components and other capability and competency-based frameworks into the way in which they support their skills, their knowledge base, as well as the way in which our staff overall perform and are able to apply that expertise back into the business. So that has been a challenge. But I think that the core around Sofia and the positive out of the use of Sofia is that it really has been used as a collaborative tool by different areas of the business, not just the IT department or the traditional IT department. It's also extending further into our HR business partners and HR departments so that they better understand what the expectations are of our digital and IT workforces and how better to support them throughout their journey. And that's been really critical as part of the uptake of Sofia, and hence why we're seeing it's becoming, especially in Australia, a number of our CIOs and C-suites are becoming really more informed and aware of Sofia as a capability framework, and that it is also very unique. There's my experience coming from the vocational education and training sector and skills-based sector is that internationally there's nothing that we can compare in other sectors. So we're very fortunate in IT, in the digital technology sector, to have such a robust as well as effective capability framework that really articulates how in which we are applying our skills and capabilities across our workforce and ultimately the sector.
Just looking at the comment that you made around reaching into HR and also spoke a little bit about the types of skills that are needed at the moment, how do you think organisations need to adjust their hiring practices to accommodate what's needed in terms of highly sought after skills, or changes obviously in the IT landscape that all of a sudden require a whole different set of skills to come into the department?
So I think the first one in terms of HR practices is really getting back to the basics, which is understanding what the true needs are for those particular roles. And that really comes with an effective baselining process. So understanding what those needs are, understanding the expectations of that role, but also the way in which roles will progress throughout the course of the organisation. So if I look at there are specific roles that we have, such as anyone in business intelligence, business analysis. Now, we've always had business analysts across a broad range of departments within organisations. Hasn't just been isolated to to the IT department, but we also have specialists that are in the domain of business analysis or business analysts for IT, because they understand the complexities that come with identifying business requirements and driving that back into the respective technology stacks within organizations and within businesses. So really the first key element, I would say, to ensuring that there is an effective way to secure, capture and draw in that talent by our HR departments is to truly understand the roles and define them effectively and consistently. That's quite critical. An example I would give is that we've worked with organisations where they've provided us with position descriptions that will articulate a role of an enterprise architect. Now, based on title alone, from an industry coming from an IT sector lens, we have a certain expectation in terms of the capabilities and skills that will be required by an individual operating against that particular role of the EA. But when we actually worked with a number, and it's happened quite consistently across a number of organisations, the way in which they've described the position of an enterprise architect differs quite greatly when you look at the detail contained within those descriptors. So that's misinforming the way in which they're trying to target respective talent to draw that talent into the organisation. So clarity and benchmarking is really critical, and I think that we're seeing that quite frequently. There's quite a large number of roles now that are advertised through places like Seek, where they are describing the Sofia skills, because that's providing that consistency and that common language as they describe that role. We are in a sector that has a identified skills shortage, and we will for a long period of time. So we have to be more effective in the way in which we identify, capture, and support skills that are brought into the business. So it's not just like isolating ourselves to a traditional IT specialist. There are individuals, as you said, Claire, that are now having a broader touch point with technology. Therefore, their digital skills and their digital capabilities have seen a dramatic uplift, which those skills tied with their pre-existing experience that they're drawing is really giving the depth that's needed broadly across our IT department. So we see over 40% of the ICT workforce don't come from qualifications that stem out of the traditional computer science or ICT specialisms. So they're drawing off their previous experience in their education that's come from areas such as business, law, accounting, marketing, and really driving that back into the business, which has had positive effects back into the IT department to better understand the way in which the IT department engage with the broader business and really support the business strategy. So our HR practices, it's really about ensuring that we understand the roles, that we have clarity around what skills are needed, but also to understand where we need to take ourselves moving forward, which is a challenge, but having an understanding of what our expectations are in terms of career and succession planning within those roles will be quite critical to and will support the success of any successful talent management approach.
Picking up on the piece you said around previous skills, what are some of the success stories that you've seen where a CIO or a C-suite has done a skills assessment, has utilised the SFIA Framework, and has been able to successfully identify skills that could or do transfer that person into a cybersecurity role or opportunity within your experience with the framework?
So the perfect example I would use is we've worked with a number of organisations that have had a heightened focus on cybersecurity, and their focus to date has been in very different areas within the business. And so therefore they were looking to baseline and identify within their existing workforce if those capabilities exist. Now, throughout a number of projects, and one in particular that I can recall is that there was an individual that had been with the organisation for a very short period of time. Their pathway into and entry into that IT workforce was as a second level support, so in the help desk. Now, when it came time to undertaking the self-assessment process that the organisation implemented, that individual had the opportunity to really define their current skill set. And that included the fact that they were a skilled migrant, they've come from overseas. However, they were a cybersecurity specialist or information security specialist at a number of large multinational organizations for a number of years, had obtained the highest level of vendor certification that you can get through OSACA. So therefore, were very skilled in terms of their knowledge base, had that depth there. But unfortunately, the organisation wasn't necessarily aware of those pre-existing capabilities of that individual. Now, throughout the course of the process, assessment was undertaken, and we were able to report, and we were very interested because the data was telling us that there was a particular individual or individuals, but in this case, just one individual that had such a heightened expertise that wasn't being capitalised on. So through that process, we spoke further with the CIO and with the senior leadership team to inform them that they actually had that individual that had acquired and had demonstrated experience to apply those skills at the level that they would like to aspire to as part of their future state lens. So with that, they actually approached that staff member, spoke further, and then also confirmed our assessment, which was that person was highly qualified, was deemed a technical specialist in a specific area within cybersecurity, and have elevated that person into a position whereby now they focus and they're really utilising the skills that they've acquired over the last 15 to 20 years outside of the Australian market. So that's been a great success story. I think the other area which we've seen has been of great benefit is where organisations are aware that they aren't necessarily focusing their attention on the right training needs, and therefore there's an expectation that specific skills should be applied by individuals if they have pre-existing qualifications, and that's not necessarily always the case. People acquire an understanding and depth to their knowledge really and extend on that based on their ability to apply that within the workforce or in the workplace. So we've worked with organisations before where there was a particular skill set that was determined as critical across the workforce, but the self-assessment and the assessment process undertaken really identified that wasn't the case, that they had a shortfall and a skills gap that needed to be addressed immediately to ensure that that organisation could elevate itself to the viewpoint that they had set, which was that they had specific skills that were needed to be applied immediately back out into the workplace. But because during that capture exercise, it was identified that they did not hold that within their existing workforce. They then implemented an approach to development, so invested in training and supporting and mentoring to ensure that the employees within the workforce were equipped with those skills over time. And that's been, again, another core reason why regardless of industry, organisations are really key in understanding and validating skills and capabilities so that they can better inform the way in which they recruit, the way in which they support and train, and also the way in which they guide succession and career pathways, opportunities across their workforce.
So in terms of this discovery of skills that sit within your business, or the opposing view, which is the discovery that you're lacking skills in your business. How does that sort of play out from a diversity perspective, from a trending or I guess a metrics approach? Do you see that most IT teams have a diversity of skills, and I guess how would you define that? But is there a trend that sort of there's generally the same types of skills in each department that are doing the framework, or is it that there's just this kind of breadth of different things that come together to build unique IT departments every time?
It really comes back to the type of organisation. If they're supporting a broader business that's in a different sector, so it's really dependent on the organisation. So I suppose from looking at a holistic view in terms of what we see trending out of the Australian economy is that there is consistency, but there's also quite a range of skills that you would identify across the organisation. So using Sofia, Sofia as a capability framework has 102 skills. Now, we would never expect in each individual organisation to acquire skills across all 102, because those skills within the framework, the way in which they're packaged and communicated or relayed within the framework itself, they're very specialised in certain areas. So yes, you will have a breadth, but also what's just as critical is the depth of those skills. So there may be a key focus around DevOps. So therefore, you wouldn't necessarily see a breadth of skills coming through in our sales and marketing areas or digital marketing focus, because their initial focus is around the development and the operations and deploying those new products and applications back into the business. So therefore, they would have a breadth of skills comprised within that division. They'd also have the depth that's needed there to ensure that they meet the expectations and they apply and drive back into the business the strategy that's needed, but wouldn't necessarily have all 102 skills out of Sofia. So we say that there's always a consistent fit. So there's always specific roles and specific skills that will come out of majority of our organisations here in Australia. There's always business analysts, there's always testers. There may be some organisations that are really focused heavily around the cloud space. So they would have infrastructure, your networking based roles. So again, that adds a breadth to the skills that could be available within the organisation. So each is very different in its own right, but there are quite a number of commonalities that we see across the sector. And that includes the certain skills that aren't necessarily identified that could be captured as part of Sofia. So an example I would use is in telecommunications. So there are very specific skills that are outlined within the capability framework of Sofia that are very specific to telecommunications, such as radio frequency engineering. I wouldn't expect that particular skill to come out of a IT department that is heavily focused on providing application support back into the business. So there will always be a range, but how refined that range is will depend on the variation and complexities of the business in which they operate in.
I think the one thing that I've learnt from all my podcast guests in terms of their opinions around skills in cybersecurity and in IT for that matter is that it's significantly contextual. So not just about what the business does, but how they do it.
And that's probably one of the things that we see, and hence why we do have some, and to inform our sector within Australia, ACS is a professional association. We have what we term common ICT job profiles. Now they're common in nature, so they have a very small number of skills contained within those profiles. But what we see back out into our organisations is that there is diversity, there is variation both in the depth and breadth of the way in which skills are applied and adapted and driven back into the business. So that variation needs to be captured in a form or baselined. And that's probably one of the reasons why a number of our CIOs that we engage with really want to understand from a high level view, but also the capacity to drill down, but look at what are the spread of skills that we do have? What are the spread of skills that we are expecting within our business? Are we prepared? Can we support that? If we have a heightened focus around cybersecurity, do we have those individuals that can drive penetration testing, ensure that we have effective security administration and resilience policies that are focused on our risk management? So there are specific areas where you can really get to that level of detail that's needed. And I think that's where why Sofia in itself, there are over 21, nearly 30 skills within Sofia that are very heavily focused on cybersecurity as a subsector because of its heightened importance, not just within the cybersecurity specialist area, but also more broadly across the business and across our organisations and government departments. So this is the great thing about Sofia as a capability framework, or any capability framework, is if that you can refine and define your benchmarking, it will ensure that you're prepared for and supporting the depth and breadth that you need across your workforce, and also how skills work cohesively together. They're not just isolated on their own. They need to work more broadly, as we do as workers within a workforce. We need to understand other areas of the business to be able to be effective in how in which we operate. And that's the same concept that could be applied with skills, is that you need to not only isolate and understand and identify skills as it relates to areas such as cybersecurity, but also what other skills need to be drawn in to ensure that it provides that support and that platform of stability to enable success in application.
So given your knowledge of the value of skills training and skills transfer, I like to ask all my podcast guests, what would they like to go back and tell their 20-year-old self about the skills that might have been needed in the future?
Well, I think telling myself, so my background originally is in a very unique area. So my original focus when I came into university, my undergraduate degree was in sports management and human movement. And I think if I look back then and think what should I have known, is that definitely that even though I originally thought my pathway was into a very different area of our economy, that I should have ensured and instilled that I had a more heightened awareness of digital technology and IT, or even engaging and computational thinking, because those skills I use now on a regular basis, but I've acquired over the last 20, 25 years within the sector. So for me, looking back, I'd say make sure that, one, I would have been more digitally focused, a bit more digitally savvy, but obviously that's probably talking more to age, noting that, the generation currently that are progressing through their touch point with technology is on a, frequently on a daily, minute by minute basis.
Louise, how can people find out more about you, connect with you, or find out more about what's been happening with Sofia at the ACS?
So in terms of touching base with myself, so obviously working for the Australian Computer Society that's been around for 50 plus years. I've been fortunate to work with ACS for the last 4.5 years. So can reach out to me via email. I do have obviously my social media handles that you can also reach out. So can be contacted on LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, the usual social media platforms that are out there. But in terms of finding out more about what we're doing within ACS, I think the great thing is, one is we underpin a lot of the products and services are underpinned by Sofia. So we have certification, we have accreditation, which is accrediting our university undergraduate degrees in ICT and computer science. So there's a number of different top touch points that are specific to Sofia. The area of the business that I work in the portfolio I work in, which is around workforce development, is heavily focused. That is our core driver and our core focus is implementing and supporting our organisations to implement Sofia. So it's really about connecting with myself, with the broader ACS team to see how and which we can really support and inform these conversations.
Great. Thank you so much, Louise, for joining me and our listeners today. I want to point out this is not a sponsored podcast. I welcomed Louise on to the show just to hear more about how Sofia works. So it's all about giving you guys the most information that we can around skills and diversity and how to get more out of your workforce. So no sponsorship, just a really great conversation. So thank you so much, Louise, for your time today.
Excellent. Thanks, Claire. Thanks for having me.
That's all we have time for today. Thanks so much for listening. For more information on all our guests, check out the show notes at thesecurecio.com, where you can also find more information on the Secure CIO Framework and sign up for my newsletter. If you loved the show, please subscribe to the podcast and feel free to leave me a 5-star rating. I'll see you next week.